Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Today's episode is called Uncivil. Greg May was an eclectic person who loved pursuing his passions. He was an accomplished tattoo artist, and the tattoo parlors he owned helped him express that artistic side while also paying the bills for something else he really loved, collecting Civil War artifacts. Most of his time was spent in flea markets and antique malls all over the U.S. looking to add pieces to his collection, a collection that included firearms, documents, and uniforms that were worth tens of thousands of dollars. In 2000, Greg had recently moved to Bellevue, Iowa, a city that sits alongside the Mississippi River. He was a divorced father of two. His children, Dawn and Shannon, had both settled in California but kept in regular contact with their father. Not many people in the town of Bellevue knew Greg or his roommate, Douglas DeBruin. DeBruin was a large ex-convict who was cheerful, covered in tattoos, and went by the nickname Moose. For months, the two would shoot pool at the local bars well into the night and have breakfast at one of the town's cafes the following morning. But things changed when DeBruin's girlfriend, Julie Miller, moved in with the two men. That's when people started to notice that DeBruin had gone from an animated, high-spirited person to one who was somber and talked very little. Greg, however, seemed to be in high spirits. He had finally made the decision to retire to Florida with his girlfriend, Jan Buman. He and Jan had dated for several months and saw each other often. One evening, Jan went to Greg's house as they had previously planned, but she found the door locked. When she looked through a window to see if he was in there, the blinds blocked most of her view, but she could see Greg's feet. He was sitting in a chair and not moving. No one would answer her repeated knocks. From there, she drove to a nearby restaurant to use the telephone to call Greg. All calls went to voicemail. She then called Greg's landlord to see if he would open the door for her, but he declined. Discouraged, she drove away. In January of 2001, Dawn and Shannon had seemingly lost track of their father. Neither could reach him by telephone, but in the beginning, they didn't worry too much about it. Greg spent a lot of time traveling while he was looking for antiques. It wasn't uncommon for his children to lose track of him for a period of time before he would resurface. He had also mentioned making the move to Florida, so his children kept trying sporadically to reach him, thinking once he got settled again, he would call. Quote, "Always, we were a close family, even with the distances between us," said his son, Don May. Weeks went by, and they still couldn't reach Greg. The more we reached out, the more we were realizing that nobody had heard from him, and he just wasn't turning up, Dawn said. When they did travel to Bellevue in February, they found that their father's house was empty, and his phone was now disconnected. When they talked to Jan, she told them about the last night that she saw Greg. She also stated that a couple of days later, she had received a call from Julie. Julie claimed that Greg was unable to make the call himself, but wanted her to tell Jan that Greg didn't want to see her anymore, and he was moving to Florida without her. Jan said she had no idea why the breakup had happened, and she hadn't heard from Greg again. Feeling something was seriously wrong, they called and reported Greg missing to the police. Before the end of February, a full investigation had been started. People in town couldn't tell investigators much. None of them really knew Greg or his roommate. The landlord stated that at the first of the year, DeBruin loaded up all of Greg's antiques into a yellow van. DeBruin told the landlord that he and Greg were breaking their lease, and then he left with his girlfriend. No one reported seeing Greg leave. Dawn and Shannon continued to search for their father despite the investigation that had been opened. Unfortunately, they also came up with very little. Flyers were hung up in the area, searches were conducted, and a $15,000 reward was offered for information that led to their father. In the spring, investigators would finally find their first solid lead. Greg's car had been discovered in a parking lot over 100 miles away in Illinois, with his wallet inside. As the car was being processed by investigators, Don received a disturbing telephone call. It seemed that some of his father's antiques had showed up at an auction in Illinois. The items, Civil War uniforms and several Confederate swords, were valued to be worth at least $70,000. The Illinois auction house showed that Julie Miller had put up several of Greg's items for auction. The two could not be found in the immediate area, but that didn't stop investigators for long. The Illinois auction house showed that DeBruin and Miller were set to auction more items off at another antique house in Flagstaff, Arizona in April. There, investigators located the two and arrested them for theft. Both insisted the antiques were actually theirs. When questioned, DeBruin claimed the last time he heard about Greg, he was on his way to Illinois. During Miller's interview with investigators and her court hearing for theft of Greg's property, she claimed to not know where Greg was or what had happened to him. Later, she would change that story, saying that Greg was in fact dead, and she had helped to dispose of his body. Proving that DeBruin had stolen Greg's property, carried it across state lines, and sold them at auction would be relatively easy. Murder, however, would require much more. Most of the evidence they had was circumstantial, but they had Miller's statement and they found a small trace of Greg's blood on DeBruin's jacket. Prosecutors decided to offer Miller immunity in Greg May's murder trial if she would testify against DeBruin and tell the court what really happened to Greg. When the trial came, prosecutors had much more evidence, and it would come from some unlikely places. In August of 2001, at a truck stop in Kearney, Missouri, a cylindrical block of concrete encased in a bucket was found. When the bucket was broken away, human hair could be seen sticking out of some parts of the concrete. The smell from the block also encouraged them to call the police immediately. When the concrete was cracked open, it was found to contain a human skull. No one had any idea who it belonged to. This led investigators to call on renowned forensic artist Frank Bender to sculpt a bust of what he thought the man might look like. When you start looking at the forms of the skull, you start to just get a feel for what the person looks like, Bender would say. He believed, quote, "The individual was middle-aged, a little on the heavy side, balding. I just went with that feeling." This, in turn, led to Ellen Leach, a Home Depot cashier and volunteer for the Doe Network. In her spare time, she researched missing persons cases online in the hopes of resolving them. In 1995, 2 of her cousins were reported missing. Even though it was later shown that the boys were killed by their mother's hands, the event inspired her to try to help others in similar situations. She said she wanted to give families closure so they know where their loved one is, so they're not sitting there for 40 years waiting on them to come home. She began comparing Bender's sculpture to pictures of people on missing persons websites and eventually matched it to Greg. From there, investigators were able to match dental records and prove it was indeed Greg May. Prosecutors received this information just 2 days before DeBruin's trial was to begin in May of 2005. At his trial, Miller gave a full account of exactly what happened to Greg. She stated that he had been strangled by DeBruin using a yellow nylon rope in their home one night. Then, the two dismembered Greg, loading up his remains along with his antique collection and traveling across the U.S., selling memorabilia while they disposed of those remains. Not only did some of the locations she specified turn up more of his remains, but she also told them what had happened to Greg's head, and it lined up with their discovery perfectly. Julie Miller received 3 years in federal prison for transporting stolen goods across state lines. For perjuring herself in her first trial by saying she knew nothing of the murder, she was given 5 years in prison. DeBruin's defense claimed that it was Miller who killed Greg by stabbing him in the chest. The jury didn't believe his claims, and after less than an hour of deliberation, found him guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree theft. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Don and Shannon went through many hardships while looking for their father, including actually finding some of his remains during one particular search. However, there were two good things that came from all of this sadness. One was that after this case, Iowa passed a law that makes it a felony to, quote, mutilate, disfigure, dismember, hide, or bury a human corpse with the intent to commit a crime. Also, the $15,000 reward that they offered in their father's case was awarded to Ellen Leach, who, I'm sure, will use it to continue helping others. Now that Greg has been put to rest, his children have turned their anger towards Julie Miller. She's never been charged with anything directly involved in their father's murder, and Don is determined to see that rectified. Case cracked. I would like to thank the LA Times, the Washington Times, the HattiesburgAmerican.com, websleuths.com, caselaw.findlaw.com, theCinemaholic.com, CBSNews.com, and the QC Times. Of course, the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case, and here she is now to discuss it with us. Christy, there's a lot of things I think that I want to talk about with this case, but one of the things is knowing that he had such a collection. And who knows what got sold while they were traveling across the country. Yeah. Who knows? They could have been stopping at gun shows and things like that and just offloading the easy stuff along the way. And to think that these are items that meant so much to him that could also potentially benefit his family, in terms of a legacy for them, either financially or for the memory of those items. What happened? What happened to the antiques?
Well, according to the QC Times, they said that Don and Shannon May spent hours in the police department sorting through boxes of rare Civil War antiques. Some of those were bayonets, canteens, 140-year-old newspapers, medals, and all kinds of engravings. There were pages of police list inventories. There were so many items.
Yeah.
Well, going through them, it gave them a chance to reminisce about their dad, and that's nice, but it would be so hard for me,
Yeah.
Finally, though, they did receive most of his possessions. There are some of them that are still important to future appeals. Okay. So they're going to have to hold those in evidence until all the appeals are exhausted.
Oh, okay. I bet it's the ones that they actually had listed at either of the auction houses that they probably
so.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least they're getting most of that stuff back, and that's, yeah. Can't imagine doing that. Can you imagine doing that, sitting in a police station, having to go through your father's items like that? And
no, it'd be too hard.
Yeah. Of course, we know Don now pretty plain about the fact that he wishes that Julie Miller would face justice in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Raises kind of a question. We know legally they kind of made a deal with her, so it's not likely to happen. But ethically, should those deals be honored? It's so interesting to me that, you can say, I'll give you the whole story, but you have to promise that you guys aren't going to prosecute me. And then later, this other information comes into play where, quite honestly, they might have not needed her as much. That when they found the remains, that might have been enough to actually win the case. So I think it's a little bit of a heartbreaker, probably from Don's perspective, to look at it that way and to see that, first of all, was she really trying to do the right thing, or is this someone that was just covering her own butt,
Yeah. And that, I had that thought too. I don't think they could really prove without this whole preponderance of evidence that one of them killed him. Seriously, if you just took it to trial and you didn't have any of the stolen artifacts and all of that other, you're going to have to put burden of proof on one of these two people, and they didn't really have the evidence for that.
Yeah.
So I see, the prosecutors called it a deal with the devil, and we've heard that one before, haven't we?
Yeah, we certainly have. But I can't imagine the entanglement, the emotional tie up that you're in with feelings about that. Being a family member and wow, this person was there for all that, didn't do the right thing, didn't step up, didn't call the authorities early on, waited until they got busted, and then kind of I'll help you guys. I get that it's tough.
It is. And I do think she should be prosecuted. But
Yeah.
with the deal in place, that's not a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Christy, in today's case, a few heroes pop up. I know we've spoken about Frank Bender and his amazing work on the channel here before. But this is the first time I'm hearing about Ellen Leach. Has she continued helping families find justice?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Since 2005, she's actually helped solve 8 cases around the country.
Wow.
I know.
That's
That's
so amazing.
incredible.
And for anyone out there that's like, oh, you're just a regular person, you're not an investigator. This is a Home Depot cashier.
Mm-hmm.
Just that cares, has a big heart, has some time, puts her energy in the right place and makes it happen. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Oh, and she's made so many friends doing this. She has lots of friends in law enforcement. Some of the detectives and departments let her look at the case files as she works.
Wow.
So, yeah,
Wow.
a lot of respect for her.
Definitely. Now, we mentioned in the script, and I actually added this part, that I was figuring she would take the reward and use that for going to help more cases. But it seems like, well, I guess she's kind of used it to help more cases. I mean, if you assume that you need to keep a roof over your head. Christy, what happened?
Well, unfortunately, Hurricane Katrina hit and it ripped the roof off of their house.
Wow.
So she ended up using that money to replace it. So, I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it seems like she still does have some contact with Don May.
Oh, yes. He still sends her Christmas cards every year.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That's nice.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing this story with us. It's great to have a few high points to talk about in something so dark as this story was. But
Yeah.
We really appreciate you, and I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters Amanda Beard, Melissa Heinbach, and special thanks to Perlette Toussaint. For over 6 years, we've always run limited commercial ads here on YouTube, and we can't do that without support. If you'd like to help the channel keep going and keep growing, please visit lordandarts.com. There, you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee like Ariana recently did. We know that learning about the mechanisms that help support and find justice in these cases is important to understand the many unsolved cases we also cover, and we really appreciate your support in allowing us to continue doing that. Remember, you can get another Lord and Art story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow and every Tuesday after that. Visit seriouslymysterious.com and subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon below if you'd like to catch one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. And of course, I'll be back with a new unsolved mystery for you on Friday, right here on the Lord and Arts channel.